Hi everyone, I'm Ruairi, a senior science writer at Technology Networks. Psychedelics are going mainstream. After years of aggressive government regulation, these mind-altering compounds are now being recognized for their potential uses in treating a host of psychiatric and neurological conditions. Now, I recently spoke to Anthony Tennyson and Professor David Nutt from Awakn Life Sciences to discuss psychedelics. Awakn is a Toronto-based company that focus on the use of psychedelics in treating addiction. Now, David is also, of course, the Edmund J. Safar Professor of Neuropsychopharmacology at Imperial College London, where he also heads up the university's Neuropsychopharmacology unit. Now, David recently joined Awakn as its Chief Research Officer, and you're about to hear my interview with David and Anthony in full. I hope you enjoy. Anthony, David, thanks so much for joining me today. Now, psychedelics are increasingly being used to treat the whole gamut of psychiatric and neurological disease. I've seen trials for major depression, bipolar disorder, anxiety, suicidal ideation. What are the unique considerations that one has to take in designing compounds and selecting compounds to treat addiction?
Well, a good start is make sure they're not addictive. So you don't switch one dependence to another. Of course, and that's what we're trying to do. I mean, traditionally, it's been very, very difficult to treat some addictions. And if you think of something like heroin addiction, most of the treatments are putting people on something that is addictive, like methadone or buprenorphine, but which isn't as dangerous. But we want to break away from that. We want to actually give people a treatment which actually disrupts the thinking processes, the repetitive, ruminative, habitual kind of behaviors and thinking underlying addiction, and by disrupting those, we think we can potentially kind of cure people as opposed to simply kind of ameliorating their condition. And psychedelics are really the only drugs that have that power to have that, to fundamentally disrupt what for many people is a decades-old form of behavior and lifestyle.
And one thing our readers and viewers might be wondering is whether or not there has to be a specialism between different forms of addiction. I've seen trials for alcohol use disorder as Awakn are running, but also for other forms of addiction as well. Are the processes underlying these forms of addiction treated in the same way?
We think they can be, yes. There are core features which all depressions share. And those are things like compulsivity, you can't stop, impulsivity, you start too fast, craving, and stress sensitivity. And those four elements, different people, of course, have different degrees of them, but those four elements are common to all addictions. And the brain process underpinning those, we think, can be disrupted, particularly the compulsivity, the habitual behavior, the repetitive, the craving, the sort of can't unlock your thinking. So those are common, and we think we can potentially therefore target both behavioral addictions and also and drug addictions and alcohol addictions.
Fantastic, thank you. Now, perhaps Anthony, you might want to take the lead in this question. Could you outline for me what the clinical trials that Awakn are planning and have in the future are?
Yeah, absolutely. So look, we do two things in Awakn Life Sciences. We do them really well, but it's quite simple actually. What we do is we do development and delivery. So we do development of psychedelic drugs and therapies to better treat addiction, and we deliver those therapies, and in time we will deliver those drugs in clinics specifically targeted at treating addiction. So in the development side, we're focused on undertaking a number of research and trial programs in order to fund or to execute on that purpose. We've got a near-term objective, a medium-term objective, and a long-term objective. Near-term objective is focused on ketamine-assisted psychotherapy, so the therapy around using ketamine to better treat alcohol use disorder. And what we've done is we've acquired the IP from the world's only clinical trial for ketamine-assisted psychotherapy for alcohol use disorder. We've acquired that under license from the University of Exeter. And what we'll be doing with that is we'll be bringing that forward to deliver that in clinics. And we are contemplating how best to bring that forward from phase 2A/B combined into phase 3. Medium-term objective is the MDMA-assisted psychotherapy to treat alcohol use disorder. So again, the therapies around how to use MDMA to better treat alcohol use disorder. Professor Nutt, Dr. Ben Sessa, and Dr. Laurie Higbett, who all now work with us in Awakn, they ran the world's only clinical trial, a phase 2A trial for MDMA-assisted psychotherapy for alcohol use disorder. The results were published in February of this year. So we're bringing that forward from phase 2A to phase 2B. And we will, this calendar year, secure ethics approval and first time in human for that particular clinical trial. And it will be the only phase 2B clinical trial for MDMA for alcohol use disorder. Ultimate goal of that work stream is to secure marketing authorization for MDMA to treat alcohol use disorder in the UK and the EU. So when we finish that phase 2B trial, if we're successful, we'll be looking to bring that forward into a pivotal trial with the MHRA. And then our long-term objective is to develop our own range of compounds that we believe will be better suited to executing and enabling the strategy, the treatment strategy that David mentioned, which is to provide compounds that will enable the human brain to take control and overwrite and overrule the compulsivity, the impulsivity in the face of those stressors that lead to those behaviors occurring. And that's what we're doing on the drug discovery side. And we've initiated a research program with Evotech, which is one of the world's largest drug discovery companies, in fact, one of the world's best drug discovery companies. And we're running a 12-month hit to lead program with them, which is focused very much and actually only focused on developing novel, potent and relevant compounds that we believe will give us the full freedom to operate. And once we've run the drug discovery program on them, then we'll bring those forward into the clinical research. And at that stage, we'll be working on how to develop the therapies in order to deliver the combination of drug and therapy in a proprietary manner in our clinics.
Great, thank you. And that actually brings me on to my next question. I was going to ask about what the role of psychotherapy is in your trials. Do you believe that's an integral part of the process?
Absolutely. So I'll answer this first, and then David, I'll ask you to contribute with way more detail, if that's okay. But it's common understanding that psychedelic assisted psychotherapy requires 4 pillars to be executed correctly and in tandem. You need the compound, you need the therapy, you need the therapist, and you need an appropriately designed clinical environment. And that really needs to force people to realize and to consider and to realize that the requirements for treating mental health and addiction are different from the requirements for treating traditional medical issues. Traditional medical issues, medicine is prescribed, sent home, or services are delivered in healthcare, and they can be kind of viewed separately. Psychedelic assisted psychotherapy to treat mental health issues and addiction, you need those 4 core pillars delivered together. And that is why we are focused on the development of the drugs and the therapies and the delivery of the drugs and the therapies in our clinical environment, because you need to do all 4 of those things together. David, what would you add to what I've
probably just saying? So
gaping gaps in that statement.
No, exactly right. But part of our program is to train therapists. In some ways, the biggest gap in this, for the biggest challenge to developing psychedelic therapy is having enough therapists. So we've got a training program being developed so we can train both psychiatrists and psychologists to do the necessary psychotherapy, prepare patients, be with patients, and then get the best out of the patient's experience.
Yeah, absolutely. So on that sort of training program, it's got 3 core focuses, right, Ruairi? It's we're training our own staff as we build up our clinical delivery platform. We'll also be training our licensed partners, because we want to put clinics in the UK and the EU, but there's a big market beyond the UK and the EU, and there's an awful lot of people that need to be helped with how we can help them beyond the UK and EU. So we will be looking to package up our experience and to license that into, for example, the North American market, and not only license the IP, but train practitioners in how to deliver our methodologies. So that's kind of where our training focuses on, training our own people in the near term, training our licensed partners in the medium term, and then also training other people who need to be trained, because 15 to 20% of the adult population are affected by an addiction. About the same number are affected by a mental health issue. Regardless of how many clinics we put in the ground or anyone else involved in this industry puts in the ground, there still will not be enough people delivering this service to solve all of the problems that need to be solved.
Yes, and it's clear that the demand for this isn't going away. There's I think an increasing recognition that different compounds will be relevant for an increasing number of indications. Can you summarize what you think the future will be for this area? Do you think that synthetic compounds, or rather novel compounds that are maybe more designed, will become available and then be targeted to specific sub indications? Or do you believe that some of the currently available compounds will dominate the market?
So there's a couple of strands to the response to that particular question. So for us, our core purpose is to democratize psychedelic assisted psychotherapy and to democratize psychedelics. And what that means is it means integrating into mainstream. And really what that means is the insurance markets need to reimburse and the public healthcare system needs to support. Because until that happens, this is out-of-pocket payment from people's disposable income. And there aren't actually that many people that have that level of disposable income, particularly in the areas that we're looking at, which is alcohol addiction, heroin addiction, or opioid addiction, gambling addiction, tobacco addiction, and other types of behavioral addictions. So to me, when you want to come up with a model that's going to be commercially interesting from an insurance markets perspective and from the public healthcare system model, you need something that works in a shorter time window, because as good as some psychedelics are, things that last 6 to 8 hours and then require a 6 to 8 hour recovery window, that starts to getting into a sort of a construct of requiring multiple shifts of staff delivered over multiple instances. That's very challenging from a capacity planning perspective and from an economics perspective. So what we want to do, and there's other people looking at this as well, we want to take the best of the entactogen type psychedelics that we're interested in and make them available in a shorter window so that it can be more economically viable to be delivered at the scale that is required to help as many people as possible. So long term, I believe that it's going to be a range of specifically designed psychedelic inspired or psychedelic compounds that will be specifically targeted at treating different indications in different ways, all of which will be targeted, in our opinion, and which most people should be looking at, which is to democratize this and to make it available in a manner that is acceptable to the insurance markets and to the public healthcare system. So that's really what I view as the long term. And really what good looks like long term is that these compounds available as medicines. They're available as part of the public healthcare system. We are not charging people out of pocket. We are to engage with the insurance markets and with the NHS as an outsourced provider. That to me is the future, and that's what good looks like.
David, would you like to add anything?
Well, yes. I mean, so I suppose I can't go into much more detail because that's giving away some IP, but we believe we have ways of partly accelerating onset. For instance, you could potentially have an intravenous form of other drug rather than oral, so that would accelerate onset. We're working with a chemist who's got a very strong track record from big pharma, particularly GSK, in working out how you can rapidly limit the effects of drugs using a particular kind of chemistry. So that's the sort of kinetic targeting we're doing. We've got, as I say, we've got expertise in doing this already from him. And then, of course, there's one of the interesting things is that no one really knows how ketamine or MDMA work. I mean, we know there's a bit about it. We know something of their pharmacology, but we know way less than we would for a conventional pharmaceutical. And one of the reasons that Anthony has brought me in is because I've made some discoveries about what how MDMA works, which I've never published, largely because I didn't have any resources to develop the data to get published, because you can't get governments don't give you funding to work on MDMA. They want you to forget about it. So Anthony kind of was generous enough to engage with me to help explore these other targets, and there's one particular target which I think is very exciting. So we're kind of trying to develop morph molecules which will do MDMA plus, and that might give us accurate efficacy. Yep. And we're actually also quite interested in some kind of hybrid ketamine MDMA molecule, which is still a bit kind of theoretical, but not impossible, and that would in itself that would be a very interesting experience for many people, I think.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And again, it's about taking the best of what exists and modifying it in a way that we believe will be more effective. And more effective is obviously better efficacy, but it's also more effective from strategy of making these treatments more acceptable within the public healthcare system and with the insurance market, so that we can broaden access to as many people as possible. Again, because if we don't broaden access, it's out-of-pocket payment, and we fail on our purpose as a company, which is to integrate into mainstream and to democratize these medicines and these therapies.
Great. Thank you both so much. I have one final question. David, I'm not going to go into detail about your history of interacting with governments on their...
Horse riding. I'm definitely in favor of horse riding.
But
our drugs will be safer than horse riding. There is no question about
that. We won't need to go into that. I'm sure we can provide innumerable links. But what I am wondering is, we're starting to see cracks in government's resistance to these compounds. Decriminalization of them in certain cities in the US, for example. My question is, do you think that more substantial cracks in how national healthcare systems regulate these products, as opposed, ketamine obviously stands alone as it's been a medication for other indications for a long time, but for the resistance to these other compounds to be broken down, do you think it will require advances in our understanding of the mechanisms, or will it require a breakthrough clinical trial? We've seen some really promising ones this year, the one from February that you mentioned, other ones involving psilocybin that have had produced really promising results. Do you believe that one of these trials will eventually prove so effective and so unignorable that there is a breakthrough in that way, or do you think it will be a more gradual process of building up an evidence base?
It'll be both, but I mean, the trials are so, the data in the trials are so good. The governments are now realizing when they do cost benefit analysis, what have we saved in terms of healthcare costs by banning these drugs? What are the opportunities for reducing healthcare costs if we make these drugs available? Enormous. So they're already, the economists are saying, it doesn't make a lot of sense really, guys, because, you haven't actually stopped people using them, and and they're not very harmful anyway. So the banning was political rather than scientific. So that's the first thing to say, that the unmet need, as Anthony's illuminated, and the patient reports, and the fact that in addiction, depends on the country you're in, but even in the very best countries like Germany, 86%, 85% of people with addictions never get treated. And then when they do get treated, the outcomes are awful. So basically, addiction is an untreated disorder, and it's killing tens of millions of people a year worldwide. So the patient argument is going to be very strong. But what's really fascinating about what we're seeing now is the fact that we're seeing that scientists, brain scientists, are very excited, because now you've got a new mechanism to the addiction. And it's not simply just a drug working on a receptor that the addiction drugs work on. You've got drugs which are affecting addiction in a novel way. And the preclinical work, the back translation is staggering. We've got papers coming out in Neuron and Cell on a kind of weekly basis showing how these drugs are transforming our understanding of the brain. And that's a pretty unstoppable train when you've got the patient's benefit and the scientists saying, wow, this is working in a novel way. So I'm pretty I think, within 5 years, MDMA and psilocybin will be medicines in some countries, and hopefully in Britain.
As you say, there's this huge unmet need. And I think we at Technology Networks and all our readers are on tenterhooks waiting to see what the next steps are. So thank you, Anthony, and thank you, David, for joining me today, and look forward to speaking with you both soon.
Rory, it was an absolute pleasure. Thank you for having us.
Great.
Take care, guys.